Picture this. You're sitting in your childhood church, surrounded by people who've known you since you were 5 years old, when your own aunt stands up in front of 200 people and declares that you're destined for mediocrity. The humiliation burns through you as every eye in that fellowship hall turns to stare, some with pity, others with curiosity about the family drama unfolding before dessert is even served. But what happens next will leave everyone speechless, including the woman who just tried to crush your spirit in the name of loving family concern. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Rebecca Martinez, and I never imagined that a simple church potluck in my hometown of Cedar Falls, Illinois, would become the day that changed everything. At 28, I had built something I was proud of, but walking back into that familiar fellowship hall always made me feel like I was 12 years old again, sitting in the back pew, hoping nobody would notice my secondhand dress, or the way my shoes squeaked against the polished floor. Growing up on Riverside Drive in a small 2-bedroom house with chipped paint and a front yard that my dad never quite had time to properly landscape, I learned early that our family operated on a different frequency than most of the congregation at Cedar Falls Methodist. My father, Carlos, spent his days managing the loading dock at the grain elevator on the outskirts of town, coming home each evening with dirt under his fingernails and stories about quotas that seemed to climb higher every month. My mother, Rosa, worked part-time at the town library, helping kindergartners find picture books and processing overdue fines with the kind of patience that only comes from genuine love for your community, even when that community sometimes looked down on your family's economic status. Money wasn't something we ever had in abundance, but my parents possessed something far more valuable, an unshakable belief that education and determination could open doors that seemed permanently locked to people like us. They drove me to every academic competition within a 50-mile radius in our aging Honda Civic, cheering from folding chairs in high school gymnasiums when I won regional spelling bees and math contests. When other kids went to summer camps or family vacations to places with names I'd only seen in geography textbooks, I spent my breaks reading business magazines at the library and teaching myself computer programming from books that were probably outdated before I even checked them out. The path to college felt like climbing a mountain in the dark, never quite sure if the next step would hold my weight. Student loans became my lifeline, combined with a partial academic scholarship to Northwestern University that felt like winning the lottery when the acceptance letter arrived in our dented mailbox. I chose marketing because it seemed like the perfect blend of creativity and strategy. But more importantly, it felt like something that could actually provide financial stability for someone like me, who didn't have family connections or trust funds to fall back on. Living in my tiny studio apartment in Chicago after graduation, surrounded by takeout containers and armed with nothing but ambition and a laptop that took 5 minutes to boot up, I started Riverside Digital Solutions. The name was my quiet tribute to the street where I'd learned that dreams were worth pursuing, even when nobody else could see their value. Those first months were a masterclass in humility, cold calling local restaurants and small businesses, offering to manage their social media presence for rates so low I could barely cover my own rent. But something magical started happening. The Italian restaurant that hired me saw a 30% increase in weekend reservations after I redesigned their Instagram strategy. The boutique clothing store downtown watched their online sales triple when I helped them connect with customers through authentic storytelling rather than generic promotional posts. Word spread through Chicago's tight-knit small business community with the kind of organic enthusiasm that no amount of traditional advertising could buy. By year 3, we had moved into a real office space in a converted warehouse in the River North neighborhood, complete with exposed brick walls and the kind of industrial lighting that made everything look like it belonged in a design magazine. Our team had grown to include Marcus, a graphic designer whose creative vision transformed ordinary products into visual stories that customers couldn't resist sharing, and Elena, a content strategist who understood how to speak to audiences in their own language, rather than corporate jargon that alienated more people than it attracted. The breakthrough moment came when we landed Midwest Manufacturing as a client, a regional company that produced specialty automotive parts for classic car restoration. Their previous marketing approach had been placing small ads in trade magazines and hoping for the best, but within 6 months of implementing our comprehensive digital strategy, they were fielding calls from enthusiasts across the country. That success story opened doors to other industrial clients who had been skeptical about online marketing but couldn't argue with results that showed up directly in their revenue reports. Last year, Riverside Digital Solutions crossed the $8 million revenue threshold, with 42 employees spread across offices in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Indianapolis. We specialized in helping traditional businesses navigate the digital landscape without losing the personal touch that made them successful in the first place. The work felt meaningful because we weren't just managing social media accounts. We were helping family businesses connect with new generations of customers while honoring the values that had sustained them for decades. But success in Chicago felt different than success in Cedar Falls. Back home, I was still Rosa and Carlos's daughter who had gotten lucky with computers, not an entrepreneur who had built something substantial from nothing but determination and strategic thinking. The quarterly visits to see my parents always included obligatory appearances at church, where the same people who had watched me grow up seemed frozen in their perception of who I was supposed to be. Cedar Falls Methodist had been the center of our family's social life for as long as I could remember. Pastor Davidson had baptized me in the small baptismal font behind the altar when I was 8 years old, and Mrs. Patterson still taught the same Sunday school class where I'd learned the books of the Bible through songs that got stuck in your head for days. The annual fall harvest potluck was a tradition that brought together 5 generations of the same families, sharing recipes that had been passed down through decades, and catching up on marriages, babies, and the kind of local news that never made it beyond the city limits. This particular October felt special because I had been quietly working on something with Pastor Davidson for the better part of 6 months. The church had been dreaming of expanding their children's ministry for years, but the building fund thermometer in the church lobby had been stuck at the same level for so long that most people had stopped noticing it. During one of my visits home, Pastor Davidson had mentioned how much they needed dedicated space for after-school programs and summer day camps, programs that could serve not just church families but any working parents in Cedar Falls who needed safe, affordable childcare options. The conversation had planted a seed that grew into a comprehensive plan. Working with my accountant in Chicago and a local architect who specialized in church construction, I had developed a proposal for a complete children's center addition that would transform the church's ability to serve young families in the community. The financial commitment was significant, but my business had reached a point where giving back felt not just possible but necessary. However, family dynamics had a way of complicating even the most straightforward situations. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's older sister, had established herself as the unofficial authority on family matters, through a combination of strategic marriages and carefully cultivated relationships with other prominent families in Cedar Falls. She had married Dr. William Patterson 25 years ago, elevating her social status from the daughter of a factory worker to the wife of the town's most respected physician. Their house on Hillcrest Avenue was the kind of place where garden parties happened, and where important community decisions seemed to get made over carefully prepared dinner conversations. Patricia had a talent for delivering criticism disguised as loving concern, always with just enough witnesses present to make contradictions seem petty or ungrateful. At my cousin Jennifer's graduation party, she had loudly wondered whether my business was really sustainable or just riding a temporary trend that would disappear as quickly as it had emerged. During Christmas dinner, she had suggested that perhaps it was time for me to consider moving back to Cedar Falls and finding something more stable, maybe working for the local bank or the school district, where benefits and predictability mattered more than entrepreneurial adventures. The pattern had been consistent for years, but I had learned to deflect her comments with polite smiles and subject changes that redirected attention to safer topics like the weather or Pastor Davidson's latest sermon series. Uncle William usually offered subtle support through meaningful glances or gentle redirections, but he rarely challenged his wife directly, especially in public settings where their social standing might be affected by family disagreements. Their children, my cousins David and Jennifer, had followed exactly the paths that Patricia had mapped out for them. David worked as an accountant at the largest firm in the county seat, handling taxes and business bookkeeping for local farmers and small business owners. Jennifer taught 3rd grade at Cedar Falls Elementary, the same school where our mothers had attended decades earlier. Both had married people they'd known since high school, bought houses within 10 minutes of their parents, and seemed genuinely content with lives that offered stability and community connection over adventure or financial ambition. There was nothing wrong with their choices, but Patricia had a way of presenting their conventional success as superior to my unconventional path, as if staying close to home and following predictable career trajectories represented wisdom that I was too naive or stubborn to understand. Her comments always carried an undercurrent of concern about my single status, my decision to live in a big city, and my choice to build something risky rather than joining an established company where someone else handled the uncertainty. The week leading up to the harvest potluck, I had spent considerable time preparing both the legal documents for my donation and my grandmother's famous tres leche cake recipe that had been requested by at least 6 different people since my last visit. The cake required 3 days of preparation if you wanted the flavors to properly meld, so I had taken time off from work to focus on getting every detail perfect. This wasn't just about bringing food to a church dinner. It was about honoring my grandmother's memory and contributing something meaningful to a community tradition that had shaped my childhood. My lawyer had finalized all the paperwork for the donation, creating a structure that would provide not just the initial construction funding, but also an endowment to support ongoing programming and maintenance. The architectural plans were beautiful, featuring bright classrooms, a playground designed for multiple age groups, and flexible spaces that could accommodate everything from toddler music classes to teenage leadership workshops. Pastor Davidson and I had reviewed every detail, but we had agreed to keep the announcement private until the right moment presented itself. Walking into the fellowship hall that Sunday afternoon felt like stepping back in time. The same long tables covered with white plastic cloths, the same hand-lettered signs designating areas for main dishes, sides, and desserts, the same groups of people gravitating toward familiar social configurations that had probably been established when they were all in high school together. Mrs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Henderson was arranging flowers near the serving area, with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything from church bulletins to vacation Bible school decorations. Patricia had claimed her usual position at the head table near the front of the room, strategically located where she could observe all the social dynamics, while being easily accessible to anyone who wanted to pay their respects or share community news. She was wearing a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, paired with jewelry that caught the fluorescent lights in a way that reminded everyone of her elevated status without being ostentatious enough to seem inappropriate for a church function. The conversation at her table revolved around safe topics: David's recent promotion to senior accountant, Jennifer's innovative approach to teaching multiplication tables, and the upcoming fundraiser for the hospital auxiliary that Patricia was organizing with her characteristic efficiency. But I could feel her attention shifting toward me as I navigated the room, greeting people I hadn't seen since my last visit, and accepting compliments on my grandmother's cake that somehow always tasted better in memory than anyone could actually recreate. When I finally made my way to Patricia's table, the conversation shifted with the subtle precision of a practiced performance. She began with warm inquiries about my trip from Chicago and polite interest in how my business was handling the changing economy. But underneath the surface pleasantries, I could sense the familiar setup building toward one of her public assessments of my life choices. "Rebecca, sweetheart," she began with the tone she had perfected over years of family gatherings. "You know we're all so curious about your computer company. It must be exciting, but also quite stressful, never knowing from month to month how things might change." The words carried just enough concern to seem caring while planting seeds of doubt about the stability of everything I had built. Other relatives nodded along with expressions that suggested they had been discussing my situation before I arrived, probably debating whether my success was real or just a lucky streak that would eventually run out. The conversation felt like a gentle interrogation disguised as family interest, with each question designed to highlight the unconventional nature of my choices rather than celebrate the results I had achieved. "Technology changes so fast these days," contributed my cousin Mark, who worked in the insurance industry and had built his entire career on the principle of minimizing risk. "I read articles about companies that seem successful one day and completely disappear the next. It makes you appreciate having something solid and predictable, you know?" Patricia seized on this opening with the skill of someone who had been steering conversations toward predetermined conclusions for decades. "That's exactly what William and I were discussing just last week. At some point, it might be wise to consider transitioning into something more established, maybe working for a larger company where there's security and benefits. You're still young enough to make that kind of change without it affecting your long-term financial planning. The suggestion was delivered with such apparent thoughtfulness that disagreeing would seem ungrateful or defensive. But the underlying message was clear. What I had built was temporary and ultimately less valuable than conventional employment. The implication that I needed her guidance about my career choices stung more than I wanted to admit, especially in a room full of people who remembered when I had needed help reaching the water fountain and tying my shoes. I tried to redirect the conversation by mentioning some of our recent client successes and the expansion into new markets, but Patricia had a talent for turning positive news into cautionary tales. When I described our work with Midwest manufacturing, she nodded thoughtfully and observed that manufacturing companies were particularly vulnerable to economic downturns. When I mentioned our growing team, she expressed concern about the responsibility of managing so many employees and the potential liability if the business encountered difficulties. Each response felt like a small paper cut, individually minor but collectively exhausting. The worst part was how reasonable she managed to sound, as if her skepticism represented mature wisdom rather than systematic undermining. Other family members began chiming in with their own examples of businesses that had seemed successful before encountering problems, creating a chorus of concern that made my achievements sound like cautionary tales rather than reasons for celebration. Pastor Davidson had been moving through the room with his usual warmth, greeting families and blessing the food with the kind of genuine care that made everyone feel valued regardless of their social status or financial circumstances. When he approached our table, his presence shifted the energy in a way that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He had a gift for making every conversation feel important and every person feel heard, whether they were discussing theology or complaining about their teenager's attitude. "Rebecca," he said with the broad smile that had comforted me through childhood disappointments and celebrated my academic victories, "I'm so glad you could make it home for this. The whole congregation has been looking forward to seeing you again." His words carried no hidden agenda or subtle criticism, just genuine pleasure at having me there. Patricia immediately engaged him in conversation about the church's upcoming Christmas pageant and the ongoing challenges of maintaining the building's aging heating system. But Pastor Davidson's presence had given me a moment to breathe and remember why I had come home, not just for the potluck but for the larger purpose that had been developing over months of careful planning and prayer. The donation paperwork was in my purse, carefully organized in a folder that also contained the architectural drawings and a detailed budget breakdown. Originally, I had planned to present everything privately after the meal, during the cleanup period, when most families would be heading home, and Pastor Davidson would have time to review the documents without pressure or public attention. But sitting there listening to Patricia's subtle campaign to undermine my credibility, I began to wonder if perhaps a different approach might be more appropriate. The moment that changed everything came during the community announcements, when Pastor Davidson invited anyone with news or prayer requests to share with the congregation. Patricia stood up with the confident posture of someone accustomed to public speaking, smoothing her dress and surveying the room with the kind of practiced smile that politicians use when addressing crowds. "I hope you'll all indulge me for just a moment," she began with the tone of someone who expected indulgence regardless of what followed. "As many of you know, our Rebecca has been living in Chicago for several years now, working in the computer industry." The way she said computer industry made it sound like something slightly disreputable, like carnival work or door-to-door sales. "I think it's important that we, as her family and church community, provide honest guidance when we see someone we love potentially heading down an uncertain path." She paused for effect, making sure she had everyone's attention before delivering the blow she had apparently been building toward all afternoon. "Rebecca, I say this with love, but I think it's time you faced reality. You'll never achieve the kind of lasting success that comes from building something solid and dependable. Some people are meant for conventional paths, and there's no shame in accepting that and making more practical choices." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted her right to judge other people's life decisions. The fellowship hall fell into the kind of silence that makes every small sound seem amplified. I could hear the ice maker cycling in the kitchen, someone's chair creaking as they shifted uncomfortably, and the distant sound of children playing in the church playground outside. Every face in the room was turned toward our table, some with expressions of curiosity, others with the kind of sympathetic embarrassment people feel when witnessing family drama they wish they could escape. My cheeks burned with a combination of anger and humiliation that felt exactly like being 12 years old again, standing in the school cafeteria while someone pointed out that my lunch came from the free meal program. But this time was different. This time I had something more than just wounded pride and defensive words to offer in response. I stood up slowly, feeling my heartbeat in my ears but drawing strength from the folder in my purse and the months of preparation that had led to this moment. "Aunt Patricia," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system, "I appreciate your concern for my future. I really do. But I think there might be some things about my situation that you don't fully understand." Turning toward Pastor Davidson, who was watching the exchange with the kind of careful attention that comes from years of mediating family conflicts and community disagreements, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "Pastor, I know we had planned to discuss this privately, but given the circumstances, I think now might be the perfect time to share some news with the congregation." I reached into my purse and withdrew the folder, my hands steadier than I had expected them to be. "I've been working with you for several months on plans for expanding the children's ministry, and I'm ready to make a formal commitment." The room seemed to lean forward collectively, sensing that something significant was about to happen but not yet understanding what form it would take. "I would like to donate $5 million to fund the construction of a new children's center here at Cedar Falls Methodist." The words felt surreal as they left my mouth, like announcing that I had decided to buy the moon or declare myself Queen of Illinois. The plans include dedicated classrooms, a modern playground, and programming space that will serve not just our church families but any working parents in Cedar Falls who need quality, affordable childcare. Pastor Davidson's face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances: surprise, disbelief, careful examination of the documents I was handing him, and finally a kind of stunned joy that brought tears to his eyes. He looked up from the architectural drawings with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something impossible becoming possible. Rebecca, this is extraordinary. This is everything we've dreamed of, and more." His voice carried the kind of authentic emotion that can't be manufactured or performed, the sound of someone seeing years of prayer being answered in a way that exceeded every hope. The fellowship hall erupted into a chaos of applause, gasps, and excited conversations as people processed what they had just heard. Patricia remained frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, and her carefully composed expression completely abandoned for perhaps the first time in my memory. Uncle William reached over to squeeze her hand, his own face showing a mixture of pride and what might have been relief that his wife's public criticism had been so thoroughly answered. People began standing and moving toward our table, wanting to congratulate me and ask questions about the plans, but also clearly struggling to reconcile this news with whatever assumptions they had been carrying about my life and success. Mrs. Henderson was crying openly, clutching the architectural drawings and pointing out features to anyone who would listen. The excitement in the room felt like Christmas morning and graduation day rolled into one, with the kind of pure joy that comes from seeing impossible dreams suddenly become achievable realities. In the midst of all the celebration and chaos, I caught Patricia's eye and saw something I had never seen there before. A recognition that she had fundamentally misunderstood not just my financial situation but my character and values. The woman who had spent years questioning my choices and suggesting that I was destined for failure was confronted with evidence that I had not only succeeded beyond her imagination but was using that success to benefit the community that had shaped us both. Pastor Davidson called for attention and formally announced the donation to the entire congregation, reading from the documents and describing the impact the new center would have on families throughout Cedar Falls. The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but more than that, it felt like a community recognizing that one of their own had not forgotten where she came from, or what mattered most. Later, as people began cleaning up and preparing to leave, Patricia approached me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I haven't understood what you were building or why it mattered. I let my own fears about unconventional choices cloud my judgment about your abilities and your character. The apology felt genuine, but more importantly, it felt like the beginning of a different kind of relationship between us. For the first time in years, we talked as equals rather than as the successful aunt and the questionable niece, and I began to understand that her criticism had come from a place of genuine concern, even if it had been expressed in ways that felt dismissive and hurtful. The drive back to Chicago that evening gave me time to process everything that had happened and what it meant for my relationship with my family and my hometown. The donation wasn't just about funding a building project. It was about demonstrating that success could be measured in different ways, and that staying true to your values didn't require sacrificing financial achievement or community connection. 6 months later, as I write this, construction on the Rebecca Martinez Children's Center is ahead of schedule and under budget. The local newspaper has covered the project extensively, and we've received inquiries from other small towns interested in similar community partnerships. My business has grown by another 20%, partly due to the positive publicity, but mostly because our commitment to community service has resonated with clients who share similar values. Most importantly, my relationship with my family has evolved into something more honest and supportive. Patricia and I have had several long conversations about women supporting each other's ambitions rather than questioning them, and she's become one of my most enthusiastic advocates in the community. She even referred a local business owner to our agency, joking that she wanted to be part of my success story rather than a cautionary tale about family dynamics. The lesson I've carried away from that Sunday afternoon is that success isn't about proving other people wrong or seeking validation from those who doubt you. Real success comes from staying true to your values, building something meaningful, and using your blessings to create opportunities for others. Sometimes the best response to criticism isn't an argument, but a demonstration of who you really are and what you're capable of achieving. Have you ever had a family member question your dreams or suggest that you weren't capable of achieving something meaningful? How did you handle their doubts, and what did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story inspired you to keep believing in your own potential, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning doubt into determination and building success on your own terms. The foundation of who I became was built on the cracked sidewalks of Riverside Drive, where my childhood unfolded in a house that seemed to shrink a little more each year as my dreams grew bigger. Our neighborhood wasn't the kind of place that real estate agents highlighted in their glossy brochures, but it was home in the truest sense of the word. The Martinez family had claimed that corner lot in 1952, when my grandfather Miguel first arrived from Guadalajara with nothing but calloused hands and an unshakable belief that America rewarded hard work with opportunity. My father Carlos inherited more than just the house when Abuelo Miguel passed away during my sophomore year of high school. He inherited a legacy of quiet dignity that showed up in the way he treated every person he encountered with respect, regardless of their position or possessions. Working at Henderson Grain Elevator meant starting before dawn and finishing after most families had already eaten dinner. But Dad never complained about the physical demands or the modest paycheck that stretched just far enough to cover our necessities, without leaving room for luxuries that other families took for granted. The grain elevator sat like a concrete monument to agricultural prosperity on the eastern edge of Cedar Falls, where trains arrived weekly to carry Illinois corn and soybeans to markets that existed beyond the boundaries of our small-town understanding. Dad's job involved coordinating the complex logistics of receiving, storing, and shipping millions of bushels of grain each season, work that required mathematical precision and physical endurance that left him exhausted but oddly satisfied at the end of each day. He often said that feeding America was noble work, even when America didn't always remember to appreciate the people who made it possible. Mom's position at the Cedar Falls Public Library represented a different kind of service to our community, one that involved nurturing minds rather than moving commodities. Rosa Martinez possessed an almost mystical ability to match the right book with the right person at exactly the right moment in their lives. She helped struggling readers discover stories that made them feel less alone, guided curious teenagers toward biographies of people who had overcome obstacles similar to their own, and provided quiet sanctuary for anyone who needed a few hours of peace away from whatever troubles waited for them at home. The library's children's section became my second home during elementary school, where I spent countless afternoons surrounded by picture books and early chapter novels, while Mom processed returns and helped patrons navigate the card catalog system that predated the computerized databases that would eventually revolutionize library science. Those hours taught me that knowledge was freely available to anyone willing to seek it out, regardless of their family's economic circumstances or social standing within the community hierarchy. Our dinner table conversations revolved around books Mom had recommended, articles Dad had read in farming journals, and my own endless questions about how the world worked beyond the borders of Cedar Falls. Neither of my parents had attended college, but they possessed a kind of practical wisdom that came from paying attention to life and learning from every experience, whether positive or challenging. They encouraged my academic curiosity, while making sure I understood that intelligence without character was ultimately worthless. Money management in our household required creativity and careful planning that would have impressed business school professors studying resource allocation under constraint conditions. Mom clipped coupons with the dedication of a researcher pursuing a breakthrough discovery, comparing prices at 3 different grocery stores and timing major purchases to coincide with seasonal sales that could save us enough money to occasionally afford small luxuries, like dinner at the local pizza restaurant or tickets to the county fair. My school clothes came primarily from the clearance racks at discount retailers, carefully selected for durability and versatility rather than fashion trends that would become outdated before the fabric wore thin. I learned to appreciate quality over quantity, taking care of everything I owned because replacement wasn't always financially feasible. This early lesson in valuing possessions and making them last would later influence my business philosophy of building sustainable systems rather than chasing short-term profits. The social dynamics of Cedar Falls Elementary became more complex as I grew older and became increasingly aware of the economic differences that separated families within our supposedly egalitarian community. Some classmates lived in houses with swimming pools and multi-car garages, took family vacations to destinations that required airplane travel, and seemed to acquire new clothes and electronic devices with casual frequency that suggested money was an unlimited resource, rather than something that required careful consideration and planning. These observations never made me bitter or resentful, largely because my parents had taught me to measure wealth in terms of love, opportunity, and character, rather than material possessions. They consistently demonstrated that dignity came from how you treated other people and how hard you were willing to work for your goals, not from the brand names on your clothing or the size of your house. This foundation would prove invaluable years later, when I encountered people who confused net worth with human worth. High school brought new challenges, as college preparation became the dominant focus of my academic efforts. Cedar Falls High School offered solid educational fundamentals, but advanced placement courses and specialized programs were limited by budget constraints that reflected the broader economic realities of small-town Illinois. I supplemented classroom learning by checking out college textbooks from the library, teaching myself calculus during study halls, and spending weekends at Northwestern University's campus library, absorbing the atmosphere of academic excellence that I hoped to someday join. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Franklin, became an unexpected ally in my college preparation process. She had attended Northwestern herself decades earlier, and recognized something in my academic performance and personal drive that reminded her of her younger self. Mrs. Franklin spent countless hours helping me navigate scholarship applications, essay writing, and the complex financial aid process that would determine whether college remained a distant dream or became an achievable reality. Scholarship applications became my part-time job during senior year, requiring the same attention to detail and persistent effort that Dad brought to his work at the grain elevator. Each application demanded a slightly different approach, highlighting different aspects of my academic achievements, community involvement, and personal background in ways that would resonate with selection committees composed of people whose lives and perspectives were dramatically different from my own experience. The Northwestern University acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, delivered by a mail carrier who had no idea he was transporting news that would change the trajectory of my entire family's future. Mom cried when I read the letter aloud at our kitchen table, and Dad's eyes filled with tears that he quickly wiped away before anyone could notice. The partial scholarship covered roughly 60% of tuition costs, leaving a financial gap that seemed insurmountable, until we met with the financial aid office and discovered that work-study programs and additional grants could bridge most of the remaining difference. Living in Chicago as a Northwestern student meant navigating a cultural transition that was simultaneously exhilarating and overwhelming. The city's energy and diversity exposed me to perspectives and opportunities that had been unimaginable from the vantage point of Cedar Falls, but the financial pressures of college life required constant vigilance and creative problem-solving that my more affluent classmates never needed to consider. My work-study position in the university's computer lab introduced me to technology that was years ahead of anything available in Cedar Falls, and I quickly discovered that I possessed an intuitive understanding of digital systems that surpassed many of my classmates who had grown up with computers in their homes. The lab supervisor, Dr. Peterson, began assigning me increasingly complex projects that involved troubleshooting network problems and training other students to use specialized software programs. Marketing courses revealed a perfect intersection between my analytical nature and creative instincts, providing frameworks for understanding consumer behavior and communication strategies that felt like puzzle solving on a grand scale. Professor Williams, who had spent 15 years in Chicago's advertising industry before transitioning to academia, became a mentor who helped me understand that successful marketing required authentic connection with audiences rather than manipulation or deception. The internship opportunities in Chicago exposed me to marketing agencies and corporations where I observed professional dynamics that were completely different from anything I had experienced in Cedar Falls. These environments operated at a pace and complexity level that demanded quick thinking and adaptability, skills that I had developed through years of stretching limited resources and finding creative solutions to everyday challenges. Graduation represented not just personal achievement but validation of my parents' sacrifices and investment in my education. They drove up from Cedar Falls in our aging Honda Civic, dressed in their best clothes and carrying cameras to document every moment of the ceremony. Seeing their pride and joy as I walked across that stage made every late night of studying and every financial stress worthwhile. The decision to remain in Chicago after graduation and start my own business rather than seeking employment with an established company represented a calculated risk that combined everything I had learned about hard work, creativity, and persistence. My parents supported this choice despite their natural concerns about financial security, understanding that entrepreneurship aligned with the same values of self-reliance and determination that had guided our family for generations. Those early months of building Riverside Digital Solutions tested every lesson my parents had taught me about persistence and resourcefulness. Working from my studio apartment meant converting my living space into an office during business hours and back into a home each evening, maintaining professional appearances during video calls, while sitting on furniture purchased secondhand and carefully restored to respectable condition. Cold calling potential clients required overcoming the same kind of intimidation I had felt walking into Northwestern's admissions office years earlier, but my parents' example of treating every person with respect and dignity served me well in these conversations. Small business owners could sense authenticity in a way that made them willing to take chances on someone who understood their challenges, because I had watched my own parents navigate similar struggles throughout my childhood. The breakthrough with Milano's Italian restaurant happened because I understood something that larger marketing agencies had missed. Authentic family businesses needed marketing strategies that honored their heritage, while attracting new customers who valued tradition and quality over trendy gimmicks. Their social media presence had been sporadic and generic, failing to capture the warmth and genuine hospitality that made dining there feel like visiting your Italian grandmother's kitchen. Working with the Milano family meant spending time in their restaurant during off-peak hours, learning about their recipes, meeting their long-term employees, and understanding the community relationships they had built over 2 decades of serving Cedar Falls families. This research informed a content strategy that showcased real stories about real people, rather than stock photography, and generic promotional language that could have described any restaurant in any city. The results exceeded everyone's expectations within the first month of implementation. Weekend reservations increased by 40%, and their weeknight business grew consistently as word spread through social media platforms about the authentic Italian experience available right in their neighborhood. More importantly, the Milano family began receiving feedback from customers who appreciated learning about the history and tradition behind their favorite dishes. Success with Milano's opened doors to other family-owned businesses throughout Chicago's diverse neighborhoods, each presenting unique challenges that required customized approaches rather than one-size-fits-all solutions. Rosa's Bakery needed help reaching younger customers while maintaining their reputation for traditional Mexican pastries. Thompson's hardware store wanted to compete with big-box retailers by emphasizing personal service and community expertise. Each client taught me something new about effective communication and authentic marketing. The decision to hire Marcus as our first graphic designer represented a major milestone in the company's evolution, from solo operation to actual business entity. Marcus brought artistic vision and technical skills that complemented my strategic thinking and client relationship abilities. But more importantly, he shared my belief that good marketing should enhance rather than manipulate consumer decision-making processes. Elena joined our team 6 months later, bringing content strategy expertise that transformed our ability to help clients tell their stories in compelling ways that resonated with target audiences. Her background in journalism meant she approached each project with curiosity and respect for truth that elevated our work above the typical advertising industry practice of prioritizing persuasion over authenticity. The Midwest manufacturing contract represented our transition into serving larger clients with more complex needs and higher expectations for measurable results. Their previous marketing efforts had focused primarily on trade publications and industry events, missing opportunities to connect with classic car enthusiasts who represented a passionate and underserved market segment for their specialty automotive parts. Developing a comprehensive digital strategy for Midwest manufacturing required research into classic car restoration communities, understanding the decision-making processes of hobbyists who valued quality and authenticity above price considerations, and creating content that demonstrated expertise while building trust with customers who were investing significant time and money in their restoration projects. The success of that campaign attracted attention from other manufacturing companies who had been skeptical about digital marketing but couldn't ignore results that directly impacted their revenue and customer acquisition costs. These B2B clients required different approaches than our restaurant and retail clients, but the fundamental principles remained consistent. Understand your audience, communicate authentically, and deliver measurable value that justifies investment in professional marketing services. Expanding to Milwaukee and Indianapolis meant replicating our success in new markets, while maintaining the personal attention and customized service that had differentiated us from larger agencies. Each new office required hiring local talent who understood regional business cultures and could build relationships within their respective communities. But our core values and methodologies remained consistent across all locations. The $8 million revenue milestone felt surreal when our accountant first presented the annual financial statements, representing growth that had exceeded my most optimistic projections from those early days in my studio apartment. But more meaningful than the financial success was the recognition that we had built something sustainable, that created value for clients, provided good jobs for employees, and contributed positively to the communities where we operated. Returning to Cedar Falls for family visits always involved a strange psychological transition from the fast-paced professional environment of Chicago to the slower rhythm and familiar relationships of my hometown. People who had known me since childhood had difficulty reconciling their memories of the girl who wore secondhand clothes and worked summers at the library with news reports about my business success and community contributions. Cedar Falls Methodist Church remained a constant source of comfort and connection to my roots, representing values and relationships that had shaped my character long before I understood anything about business strategy or marketing principles. The same families occupied many of the same pews they had claimed when I was a child, and the sense of community continuity provided stability that balanced the constant change and growth of my professional life. Pastor Davidson had watched me grow up through confirmation classes and youth group activities, offering guidance and encouragement during those difficult teenage years, when the gap between my family's economic circumstances and my academic ambitions sometimes felt impossible to bridge. His sermons about using individual talents to serve the broader community had influenced my thinking about business success and social responsibility long before I had the resources to act on those convictions. The children's ministry at Cedar Falls Methodist had always operated with limited space and resources, making do with basement classrooms that flooded during heavy rains and playground equipment that had been donated by families whose own children had outgrown it years earlier. Pastor Davidson's dream of expanding these programs to serve working families throughout Cedar Falls represented exactly the kind of community impact that justified business success in my mind. Discussions with Pastor Davidson about potential funding for expanded children's programming began casually during one of my quarterly visits home, but evolved into serious planning as I realized that my business had reached a level of financial stability that made significant charitable giving not just possible but morally imperative. The architectural plans and financial projections that emerged from these conversations represented months of careful research and consultation with experts in church construction and childhood development programming. However, family dynamics within the extended Martinez and Herrera families had always been complicated by economic differences and varying perspectives on success, education, and appropriate life choices for young women. These tensions had existed long before my business success but became more pronounced as my achievements attracted attention that some family members found uncomfortable or threatening to their own sense of accomplishment and social standing within the Cedar Falls community. The evolution of Riverside Digital Solutions from a one-person operation into a legitimate business entity required navigating challenges that business school case studies could never fully capture. Building something from nothing meant making hundreds of decisions each day, without the luxury of extensive market research or advisory boards that established companies took for granted. Every choice, from selecting office space to hiring employees, carried consequences that could either accelerate growth or derail everything I had worked to build. The transition from my studio apartment to our first real office space in River North felt like crossing a threshold into legitimacy that I had dreamed about during those early months of eating ramen noodles and working 18-hour days. The converted warehouse building offered exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures that created an atmosphere of creative authenticity, but more importantly, it provided enough space to accommodate the team I envisioned building as our client base continued expanding. Finding the right employees required a delicate balance between technical skills and cultural fit that determined whether our growing company would maintain the values and work ethic that had attracted our initial clients. Marcus arrived through a recommendation from Professor Williams, who had noticed his exceptional design portfolio and suggested he might be interested in joining a startup that prioritized creativity over corporate conformity. His artistic vision transformed our client presentations from functional documents into compelling visual narratives that helped business owners see their companies through fresh perspectives. Elena's recruitment happened more serendipitously during a networking event at the Chicago Marketing Association, where her presentation about authentic storytelling in digital media caught my attention immediately. Her journalism background brought a commitment to truth and accuracy that elevated our content strategy beyond typical marketing rhetoric, helping clients communicate their values and expertise in ways that built genuine trust with target audiences, rather than simply generating short-term sales increases. The challenge of scaling our operations while maintaining quality required developing systems and processes that preserved the personal attention and customized service that had differentiated us from larger agencies. Each new client presented unique circumstances that demanded tailored solutions, but we also needed consistent methodologies that ensured reliable results regardless of which team member managed the account. This balance between standardization and customization became a defining characteristic of our company culture. Client diversity emerged naturally as word-of-mouth referrals brought us businesses from various industries and demographic segments throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. The challenges facing a family-owned Mexican bakery were completely different from those confronting a specialty manufacturing company. But underlying principles of authentic communication and value-driven marketing remained consistent across all sectors. This variety kept our work interesting, while teaching us valuable lessons about adaptability and creative problem-solving. The manufacturing sector presented particularly intriguing opportunities, because many companies in this space had been overlooked by marketing agencies that focused primarily on consumer-facing businesses. Companies like Midwest Manufacturing possessed deep expertise and quality products, but struggled to communicate their value propositions to customers who were increasingly conducting research and making purchasing decisions through digital channels. Their traditional approach of relying on trade shows and industry publications was becoming less effective as younger decision-makers entered their target markets. Developing effective B2B marketing strategies required understanding complex sales cycles, and multiple stakeholders involved in purchasing decisions for industrial products and services. The classic car restoration market that became Midwest manufacturing's specialty represented a perfect intersection of passionate hobbyists and serious collectors who valued authenticity and expertise above price considerations. These customers conducted extensive research before making purchases and relied heavily on peer recommendations and detailed technical information. Creating content that resonated with classic car enthusiasts meant immersing ourselves in restoration culture and understanding the emotional connections people formed with their vehicles. These weren't just transportation devices but personal projects that represented craftsmanship, history, and individual expression. Marketing messages that acknowledged this deeper meaning were far more effective than generic promotional language that treated automotive parts as commodity products. The success of our manufacturing clients attracted attention from other B2B companies who had been skeptical about digital marketing but couldn't ignore measurable results that directly impacted their revenue growth and customer acquisition costs. Professional services firms, industrial suppliers, and specialized contractors began seeking our help in reaching new markets and communicating their expertise to audiences who were increasingly researching vendors online before making contact. Geographic expansion into Milwaukee and Indianapolis reflected our growing confidence in our methodology and our desire to serve clients in markets that were underserved by sophisticated marketing agencies. These cities offered strong manufacturing bases and entrepreneurial communities that aligned perfectly with our focus on helping established businesses adapt to changing communication landscapes while maintaining their core values and competitive advantages. Each new office required careful attention to local business cultures and community relationships that couldn't be replicated simply by importing our Chicago approach into different markets. Milwaukee's manufacturing heritage and strong German-American business traditions demanded respect for established practices while introducing innovative marketing strategies. Indianapolis offered opportunities to work with companies serving agricultural and automotive sectors that required deep understanding of technical specifications and regulatory requirements. Hiring local talent in each market ensured that we could build authentic relationships within business communities while maintaining consistent quality and service standards across all locations. Regional managers needed to understand our core philosophy while adapting implementation strategies to local preferences and communication styles. This decentralized approach allowed us to scale operations without losing the personal touch that had attracted our initial clients. The financial milestones that marked our company's growth represented more than just revenue increases. They validated the belief that authentic marketing could compete successfully against larger agencies that relied on volume and standardized approaches. Reaching $8 million in annual revenue felt significant, not because of the number itself, but because it represented hundreds of successful client relationships and thousands of effective marketing campaigns that had generated real value for business owners throughout the Midwest. Employee satisfaction became increasingly important as our team grew and individual contributions became more specialized. Creating a workplace culture that balanced professional growth opportunities with personal fulfillment required ongoing attention to communication, recognition, and shared decision-making that kept everyone invested in our collective success. Regular team meetings and quarterly retreats provided forums for discussing challenges and celebrating achievements while maintaining the collaborative atmosphere that had characterized our early days. Professional recognition within the marketing industry validated our approach and attracted inquiries from potential clients who had heard about our work through trade publications and industry conferences. Speaking engagements at marketing association events and guest lectures at business schools provided opportunities to share our philosophy while learning from other professionals who were addressing similar challenges in their respective markets. The decision to establish a foundation focused on supporting young entrepreneurs reflected my growing awareness that business success carried responsibilities beyond generating profits for stakeholders. Having benefited from mentorship and guidance during my own journey, I felt obligated to create similar opportunities for other people who possessed talent and determination but lacked access to networks and resources that could accelerate their progress. Educational initiatives that provided free marketing workshops for small business owners addressed a significant gap in resources available to entrepreneurs who couldn't afford professional marketing services but needed guidance in reaching customers effectively. These programs also served as recruitment opportunities for identifying talented individuals who might eventually join our team or become clients as their businesses grew and required more sophisticated marketing support. Community involvement in Chicago's small business ecosystem included participation in entrepreneur networking groups and mentorship programs that connected experienced business owners with people who were just starting their journeys. These relationships often proved mutually beneficial, providing fresh perspectives on industry trends while creating opportunities to share hard-earned lessons about avoiding common pitfalls and maximizing limited resources. The contrast between my professional environment in Chicago and family dynamics back in Cedar Falls became more pronounced as business success attracted media attention and industry recognition that reached beyond marketing circles. Local newspapers in Illinois began featuring stories about successful entrepreneurs who had grown up in small towns, and my company's growth was occasionally mentioned in these profiles as an example of Midwest business success. However, recognition and achievement were interpreted differently by various family members depending on their own experiences and perspectives on appropriate life paths for women from working-class backgrounds. Some relatives expressed genuine pride and excitement about my accomplishments, while others seemed uncomfortable with the attention and public recognition that success had brought to our extended family. Aunt Patricia's reactions had always been the most complex and troubling, combining surface-level congratulations with subtle questions and comments that seemed designed to undermine confidence rather than offer support. Her pattern of behavior suggested deep-seated discomfort with unconventional success that didn't fit predetermined expectations about appropriate career choices for women from families like ours. The social dynamics within Cedar Falls reflected broader tensions between traditional values and changing economic realities that affected many small Midwestern communities. Young people who left for college and careers in larger cities were sometimes viewed with suspicion or resentment by those who had remained local, especially when their achievements suggested that staying home might not represent the only path to meaningful success. These undercurrents became more apparent during family gatherings, where conversations inevitably turned to comparisons between different life choices and their relative merits. Patricia's position as the wife of Cedar Falls' most prominent physician gave her opinions particular weight within family discussions, and her tendency to frame unconventional choices as risky or inappropriate influenced how other relatives perceived my business ventures. The irony that my success had been built on helping traditional businesses thrive in changing markets was often lost in these discussions, which focused more on the perceived instability of entrepreneurship than on the actual results that Riverside Digital Solutions had achieved for clients. Patricia's comments suggested that she viewed any deviation from conventional employment as inherently problematic, regardless of financial outcomes or professional satisfaction. Church attendance during visits home provided refuge from these family tensions, while connecting me with community members who remembered me as a child and young adult rather than as a successful business owner. The familiar rhythms of worship services and the unchanging physical environment of the sanctuary offered comfort and continuity that balanced the constant change and growth of my professional life. Pastor Davidson's sermons often addressed themes of stewardship and using individual talents to serve others, concepts that had influenced my thinking about business ethics and social responsibility long before I had the resources to act on these convictions. His guidance during my teenage years had helped shape my understanding that success without service was ultimately empty, a lesson that informed both my business practices and philanthropic interests. The children's ministry at Cedar Falls Methodist operated with the kind of resourcefulness and dedication that characterized many small church programs, making maximum impact with minimal budgets and volunteer labor from committed families. The basement classrooms flooded during heavy spring rains, the playground equipment showed decades of wear from multiple generations of users, and programming was limited by space constraints that prevented expansion of services that could benefit working families throughout the community. Pastor Davidson's vision for enhanced children's programming included after-school care, summer day camps, and educational enrichment activities that would serve families regardless of their church membership or ability to pay full program costs. These services would fill a significant gap in Cedar Falls' childcare infrastructure, while providing safe, nurturing environments where children could develop academically, socially, and spiritually under professional supervision. Initial conversations with Pastor Davidson about funding possibilities began tentatively during one of my quarterly visits home, when he mentioned the building committee's discussions about long-term expansion goals and the challenges of raising sufficient capital for major construction projects. Small congregations with limited financial resources struggled to balance ongoing operational expenses with ambitious improvement plans that required substantial upfront investments. My growing interest in this project reflected both personal connection to the church community that had shaped my values and professional understanding of how strategic investments could generate lasting positive impacts. The combination of my business success and deep roots in Cedar Falls created unique opportunities to support initiatives that would benefit current families while honoring the community traditions that had influenced my own development. Research into church construction and children's programming revealed that successful projects required careful planning, professional design expertise, and ongoing funding commitments that extended beyond initial building costs. Working with architects who specialized in religious facilities and childhood development experts ensured that any investment would create maximum value for families while meeting all safety and regulatory requirements for childcare operations. Financial planning for such a significant charitable commitment required consultations with tax attorneys and financial advisors who could structure donations in ways that maximized benefits for both the church and my own tax situation. The complexity of gift planning for major charitable contributions involved considerations about timing, payment methods, and long-term endowment funding that would sustain operations indefinitely. The architectural drawings that emerged from this planning process depicted facilities that would transform Cedar Falls Methodist's ability to serve young families throughout the community. Bright, modern classrooms designed specifically for different age groups, outdoor play areas with safety equipment that met current standards, and flexible multipurpose spaces that could accommodate various programming needs throughout the week. However, the decision to make this announcement during the Harvest Potluck had not been part of my original plan, which involved private discussions with Pastor Davidson and the church board before any public revelation of the donation. The family dynamics that unfolded during that Sunday afternoon changed my approach in ways that would have lasting implications for relationships with relatives who had questioned my choices and achievements. The weeks following that transformative Sunday afternoon at Cedar Falls Methodist unfolded like chapters in a story I was still learning to write, each day bringing new conversations and unexpected developments that reshaped relationships I had assumed were permanently fixed in their patterns. The immediate aftermath of my announcement had created a kind of social earthquake, whose tremors continued reverberating through family networks and community circles, in ways that surprised everyone involved, including myself. Patricia's transformation began with a phone call that came 3 days after the potluck, her voice carrying a vulnerability I had never heard before. She asked if we could meet privately to discuss what had happened, acknowledging that her public comments had been inappropriate and hurtful regardless of whatever motivations had driven them. We arranged to meet at the small cafe downtown where she had taken me for hot chocolate after dance recitals when I was 8 years old, a location that seemed symbolically appropriate for attempting to rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations. The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever shared, marked by Patricia's willingness to examine her own behavior and motivations, with an honesty that revealed depths I hadn't known existed beneath her carefully constructed public persona. She explained that watching my success had triggered her own unresolved fears about choices she had made decades earlier, particularly her decision to abandon her teaching career after marriage, in favor of supporting her husband's medical practice and maintaining their social position within Cedar Falls' hierarchy. Patricia admitted that she had projected her own doubts and regrets onto my unconventional path, interpreting my independence and professional achievements as implicit criticism of her more traditional choices. Her comments at family gatherings had been defensive mechanisms designed to protect her sense of self-worth by diminishing accomplishments that made her question whether she had settled for security instead of pursuing her own ambitions. This revelation reframed years of tension between us, replacing resentment with understanding and creating space for genuine connection. Our relationship evolved gradually over the following months as Patricia made deliberate efforts to understand my business and support my goals rather than questioning them. She began reading industry publications and asking thoughtful questions about marketing strategies and client relationships, demonstrating genuine interest in learning about work that had previously seemed foreign and threatening to her worldview. More significantly, she started introducing me to other community members as her successful entrepreneur niece, rather than simply as Carlos and Rosa's daughter who worked with computers. The ripple effects of that Sunday extended far beyond family dynamics, generating interest and opportunities that transformed both my business prospects and community involvement in Cedar Falls. The local newspaper requested an interview about my donation and business success, leading to a feature story that was picked up by regional publications and eventually caught the attention of national media outlets focused on small-town economic development and successful female entrepreneurs. This publicity attracted inquiries from potential clients throughout Illinois and neighboring states, business owners who were intrigued by our approach to helping traditional companies adapt to digital marketing without compromising their core values or community connections. The authenticity that had made our work successful in Chicago resonated equally well with entrepreneurs in smaller markets who felt overlooked by large agencies that didn't understand rural and small-town business cultures. Pastor Davidson and I worked closely with architects and contractors throughout the winter months, refining plans for the Children's Center and ensuring that every detail reflected both practical needs and aesthetic considerations that would enhance the church's overall campus. The design process required balancing ambitious programming goals with realistic construction budgets, creating spaces that would serve multiple functions while maintaining the welcoming atmosphere that made Cedar Falls Methodist feel like an extended family gathering place. Construction began in early spring with a groundbreaking ceremony that drew community members from across the political and denominational spectrum, unified by shared excitement about enhanced childcare options that would benefit working families regardless of their church affiliation. The sight of earth-moving equipment and construction workers on church property generated daily conversations among Cedar Falls residents, who stopped by to observe progress and offer encouragement to volunteers who were providing labor and coordination support. The project timeline stretched through summer and into early fall, with regular updates from contractors and frequent site visits that allowed me to monitor quality and address challenges as they emerged. Watching the building take shape week by week provided tangible evidence that financial resources could be transformed into lasting community assets that would serve families for generations, validating my belief that business success carried responsibilities beyond personal enrichment. Local media coverage of the construction progress brought additional attention to Riverside Digital Solutions, resulting in speaking invitations at business conferences and networking events throughout the Midwest. These opportunities allowed me to share lessons learned about building authentic client relationships and maintaining company culture during periods of rapid growth, topics that resonated with other entrepreneurs who were navigating similar challenges in their respective industries. The speaking engagements led to consulting opportunities with business organizations and economic development groups that wanted help understanding how successful companies could maintain rural and small-town connections while competing in global markets. These conversations revealed widespread interest in business models that prioritized community impact alongside financial performance, suggesting that our approach addressed broader trends rather than representing isolated success stories. Elena and Marcus assumed greater leadership responsibilities within our company as my speaking schedule and community commitments increased, demonstrating the depth of talent and dedication that had made our rapid growth sustainable. Their ability to maintain client satisfaction and project quality while I focused on external opportunities validated our hiring decisions and proved that company culture could survive and thrive even when founding leadership was frequently absent from daily operations. The foundation we established to support young entrepreneurs gained momentum as word spread about our mission and approach to mentorship. Applications for workshops and guidance sessions arrived from throughout Illinois and neighboring states, submitted by aspiring business owners who needed practical advice but couldn't afford professional consulting services. These programs allowed us to share knowledge while identifying talented individuals who might eventually become employees or collaboration partners. Working with young entrepreneurs reminded me constantly of my own early struggles and the importance of mentorship in overcoming obstacles that seemed insurmountable without guidance and encouragement. Many applicants possessed technical skills and creative vision but lacked understanding of business fundamentals like financial planning, legal requirements, and marketing strategies that were essential for sustainable success. The mentorship relationships that developed through foundation programs often evolved into lasting professional connections that benefited both parties. Young entrepreneurs brought fresh perspectives on technology trends and consumer behavior changes, while experienced business owners provided practical wisdom about avoiding common pitfalls and maintaining focus during challenging periods. These exchanges created networks of mutual support that extended far beyond formal program structures. Church completion ceremonies in October brought together community members who had followed the project's progress and supported its development through various forms of assistance and encouragement. The dedication service included tours of the new facilities, presentations about programming plans, and testimonials from families who had already begun utilizing childcare services that were transforming their daily routines and economic opportunities. The Children's Center exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of both physical beauty and functional effectiveness, featuring bright classrooms with abundant natural light, outdoor play areas designed for different age groups and activity types, and flexible multi-purpose spaces that could accommodate everything from parent education workshops to community meetings. The architectural design honored the church's traditional aesthetic while incorporating modern safety features and accessibility compliance that ensured universal usability. Programming development required collaboration with early childhood education specialists and family services organizations that brought expertise about age-appropriate activities and developmental goals. The resulting curriculum balanced educational enrichment with recreational fun, creating environments where children could learn and grow while parents worked or attended to other responsibilities without worrying about supervision quality or safety concerns. The economic impact of expanded childcare availability rippled throughout Cedar Falls as working parents gained flexibility that enabled them to pursue career advancement opportunities or additional education that had previously been impossible due to supervision constraints. Several single mothers enrolled in community college courses for the first time, and multiple families reported that reliable after-school care had eliminated the stress and expense of complicated childcare arrangements that had limited their employment options. Regional recognition for the Children's Center project attracted visitors from other small communities that were interested in replicating similar initiatives, leading to consulting opportunities that combined my business expertise with practical experience in community development and charitable giving. These conversations revealed widespread need for creative approaches to rural economic development that leveraged private resources for public benefit while maintaining local control and community character. The success of our Cedar Falls project inspired similar initiatives in Milwaukee and Indianapolis, where our regional offices began identifying community organizations that could benefit from strategic partnerships with local businesses. These efforts created opportunities for employees to develop leadership skills while building relationships with nonprofit organizations that shared our commitment to authentic community engagement rather than superficial corporate social responsibility programs. Professional recognition within the marketing industry continued expanding as trade publications featured articles about our company culture and community involvement initiatives. Industry awards and conference speaking invitations validated our belief that business success and social responsibility were complementary rather than competing priorities, encouraging other companies to explore similar approaches to stakeholder engagement and community investment. The second annual Harvest Potluck at Cedar Falls Methodist took place exactly 1 year after the Sunday that had changed everything, providing an opportunity to reflect on the transformations that had occurred in both personal relationships and community capacity during the intervening months. Patricia and I sat together at the same table where our confrontation had unfolded, but this time our conversation focused on collaborative planning for future projects, rather than defensive arguments about past choices. The Children's Center buzzed with activity during the potluck preparation, as young families utilized the new facilities and programming options that had become integral parts of their weekly routines. Parents who had struggled with childcare logistics the previous year were now able to volunteer for church activities and community events because their children were engaged in supervised activities that combined fun with learning opportunities. Pastor Davidson's remarks during the community announcements included updates about the center's impact on family participation in church activities and its growing reputation throughout the region as a model for rural community development. He also announced plans for expanding programming to include adult education classes and senior citizen activities that would utilize the flexible spaces during hours when childcare services weren't operating at full capacity. The financial sustainability of ongoing operations had been addressed through a combination of my initial endowment funding, modest fee structures for families who could afford them, and sliding scale arrangements that ensured access regardless of economic circumstances. This model allowed the center to maintain high-quality programming while remaining accessible to all families who needed childcare support, fulfilling the original vision of community service that had motivated the entire project. Conversations throughout the potluck reflected the broader changes that had occurred in how community members thought about success, entrepreneurship, and the relationship between individual achievement and collective well-being. Young people who had previously assumed they would need to leave Cedar Falls permanently to find meaningful career opportunities were now exploring possibilities for building businesses that could thrive in smaller markets while maintaining strong community connections. Several high school students approached me during the afternoon to discuss their own entrepreneurial ideas and ask advice about pursuing business education that would prepare them for leadership roles in rural economic development. These conversations demonstrated that the Children's Center had become a symbol of possibility that extended far beyond its immediate function as a childcare facility, inspiring broader thinking about how individual success could contribute to community vitality. The networking connections that had emerged from the original publicity about my donation continued generating business opportunities for Riverside Digital Solutions, while also creating pathways for other Cedar Falls entrepreneurs to access resources and expertise that had previously been available only in larger metropolitan areas. Several local business owners had begun collaborating on marketing initiatives and shared services that reduced costs while improving their collective ability to compete with regional and national competitors. Family relationships that had been strained by years of subtle tensions and misunderstandings continued healing through honest conversations and shared commitment to supporting each other's goals, rather than defending predetermined notions about appropriate life choices. Patricia had become one of my most enthusiastic advocates within the Cedar Falls business community, introducing me to potential clients and speaking proudly about my achievements at social gatherings, where her opinions carried significant influence. Uncle William's quiet support throughout the previous year had evolved into active participation in promoting the Children's Center and encouraging other community leaders to consider similar investments in local infrastructure and programming. His medical practice had begun referring patients to the center's parent education workshops, and he had joined the church building committee to provide expertise for future expansion projects that were already being discussed. The cousins who had once seemed uncomfortable with my unconventional success were now asking detailed questions about business strategies and requesting introductions to potential mentors who could help them develop their own entrepreneurial ventures. David had begun exploring opportunities to expand his accounting practice beyond traditional tax preparation services, while Jennifer was developing plans for educational consulting that would help rural schools implement technology initiatives more effectively. These family developments reflected broader cultural shifts within Cedar Falls and similar communities throughout the Midwest, where younger generations were beginning to view entrepreneurship and innovation as viable alternatives to the traditional choice between staying local with limited opportunities or leaving permanently for careers in larger cities. The Children's Center had become a tangible example of how private success could be leveraged for community benefit, without requiring anyone to abandon their roots or compromise their values. The final surprise of that anniversary potluck came when Pastor Davidson announced that our project had been selected as a case study by the National Rural Church Development Institute, which would be documenting our process and outcomes to help other small congregations understand how strategic partnerships with local businesses could generate resources for community improvement initiatives that might otherwise remain unrealistic dreams. This recognition validated the broader significance of what had begun as a personal desire to give back to the community that had shaped my values and supported my early development. The model we had created offered replicable strategies for rural economic development that honored local traditions while embracing change and innovation as necessary components of sustainable community vitality. As families began cleaning up and preparing to leave that Sunday afternoon, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from the humiliation of public criticism to the satisfaction of meaningful community impact achieved through hard work, strategic thinking, and commitment to values that transcended financial considerations. The transformation had affected not just my own life, but the lives of countless families who would benefit from enhanced childcare options, and the broader cultural shift toward viewing success as a community asset rather than individual achievement. The lessons learned through this experience had influenced every aspect of how I approached business decisions and personal relationships, reinforcing my belief that authentic success required using individual talents and resources to create opportunities for others rather than simply accumulating wealth or recognition for personal satisfaction. The Children's Center would serve families for decades to come, but the more important legacy was the demonstration that small communities could thrive when successful individuals chose investment over escape. Looking ahead, the Foundation's work would continue expanding to serve entrepreneurs throughout the region, while Riverside Digital Solutions would maintain its commitment to helping traditional businesses adapt to changing markets without abandoning the values and community connections that made them successful. The integration of business excellence with social responsibility had proven both financially viable and personally fulfilling, creating a model that other entrepreneurs were already beginning to adopt and adapt for their own circumstances. The story that had begun with public embarrassment and family tension had evolved into a celebration of how individual success could strengthen community bonds and create lasting positive change when guided by authentic values and genuine commitment to serving others. The Harvest Potluck that had once represented judgment and criticism had become an annual celebration of shared accomplishments and collaborative vision for continued growth and development. Patricia's final words as we parted that evening captured the essence of what we had all learned through this experience. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the courage to pursue our dreams while maintaining the humility to use our success in service of something larger than ourselves. The children's laughter echoing from the new playground would remind future generations that individual achievement and community prosperity were not competing goals, but complementary aspects of a life well lived. The subtle undermining had been happening for years, woven so carefully into family interactions that I had learned to dismiss it as Patricia's way of showing concern, rather than recognizing it as a systematic pattern designed to keep me questioning my own judgment and achievements. The comments always came disguised as loving advice or practical observations, delivered with just enough witnesses present to make contradictions seem defensive or ungrateful, creating an atmosphere where my success felt illegitimate even when the evidence clearly demonstrated otherwise. Easter Sunday gatherings had become particularly challenging venues for these interactions, where Patricia would position herself strategically among the extended family and church members who respected her opinion as the wife of Cedar Falls' most prominent physician. Her questions about my business always carried subtle implications that technology companies were inherently unstable, that working with computers was somehow less substantial than traditional professions, and that my decision to remain single and live in Chicago represented poor judgment that would eventually require correction. The pattern had become so predictable that I began preparing responses in advance, practicing neutral deflections that would redirect conversations toward safer topics without creating obvious conflict that might upset other family members or disrupt church fellowship. But this defensive posture was exhausting and demoralizing, requiring constant vigilance to protect my confidence and sense of accomplishment from someone who should have been celebrating my achievements rather than questioning their validity. Patricia's influence extended beyond direct conversations to include strategic comments made to other family members when I wasn't present, creating a network of doubt and concern that reached me through well-meaning relatives who had been convinced that my lifestyle and career choices represented risks that required intervention. Cousins would pull me aside during family gatherings to express worry about my financial security, my lack of traditional relationship milestones, and my apparent unwillingness to settle down in a more conventional manner. These secondary conversations were perhaps more damaging than Patricia's direct criticism, because they seemed to represent broader family consensus rather than one person's opinion, making me feel isolated and misunderstood even within my own extended family network. The cumulative effect was a constant low-level anxiety about whether my choices were actually as successful and meaningful as they appeared from my perspective, or whether Patricia's skepticism reflected wisdom that I was too stubborn or naive to recognize. The irony that my business specialized in helping traditional family companies thrive in changing markets was lost in these discussions, which focused more on perceived risks than demonstrated results. Patricia seemed unable to reconcile her assumptions about computer work with the reality that Riverside Digital Solutions had generated millions of dollars in revenue while helping dozens of established businesses increase their own profitability and market reach. Her comments about my single status carried particular sting because they implied that professional success without traditional relationship milestones represented incomplete development or misplaced priorities. The suggestion that I was somehow deficient for focusing on building a company rather than pursuing marriage and children felt especially unfair given that many male entrepreneurs were celebrated for similar dedication to their business ventures without equivalent scrutiny of their personal lives. The geographic distance between Chicago and Cedar Falls had provided some protection from these dynamics during the early years of building my company, when quarterly visits home were brief enough to limit exposure to extended family criticism. But as Riverside Digital Solutions gained recognition and generated media coverage that reached back to my hometown, Patricia's comments became more frequent and pointed, as if my growing success threatened her authority to define appropriate life choices for women in our family. Church attendance during these visits had always provided refuge from family tensions, offering familiar rituals and relationships that connected me to positive childhood memories and core values that had guided my personal and professional development. The sanctuary represented neutral ground, where Patricia's social influence was balanced by Pastor Davidson's inclusive leadership, and the broader congregation's genuine warmth toward someone they had watched grow up within their community. But even these sacred spaces weren't entirely safe from the undercurrents of family dysfunction that followed me throughout Cedar Falls, creating subtle stress that made homecoming visits feel more obligatory than restorative. The anticipation of navigating Patricia's comments and managing family dynamics often overshadowed the genuine pleasure I felt in reconnecting with my parents and childhood friends, who celebrated my achievements without reservation or hidden agenda. The Harvest Potluck represented the culmination of this building tension, where all the elements that had been simmering beneath the surface would finally come together in a confrontation that would force everyone involved to acknowledge the dysfunction that had been poisoning family relationships for years. Patricia's decision to make her criticism public rather than continuing with private comments suggested that she viewed my continued success as threatening enough to require more dramatic intervention. The careful preparation I had undertaken for announcing the Children's Center donation reflected months of collaborative planning with Pastor Davidson and professional advisors who had helped structure the gift in ways that would maximize its impact while meeting all legal and tax requirements. The architectural drawings and financial projections represented serious commitment to community improvement that went far beyond typical charitable giving, creating resources that would serve families for generations. But the decision to present this information publicly, rather than through private discussions with church leadership, hadn't been part of my original plan, which assumed that family dynamics would remain manageable, and that Patricia's criticism would stay within its usual bounds of subtle undermining rather than escalating to direct public confrontation. The moment when she stood up to address the congregation about my life choices represented a crossing of boundaries that required immediate and decisive response. The folder in my purse contained more than just donation paperwork. It represented validation of everything I had worked to build and proof that success could be measured in community impact rather than just personal achievement. The architectural plans showed bright classrooms designed specifically for different age groups, outdoor play areas with modern safety equipment, and flexible multi-purpose spaces that would accommodate various programming needs throughout the week. Financial projections demonstrated that the endowment structure would sustain ongoing operations indefinitely, ensuring that child care services would remain available regardless of economic fluctuations or changes in church leadership. The legal framework protected both the congregation and the broader community by establishing clear governance structures and accountability measures that would preserve the center's mission while allowing for adaptation as needs evolved over time. Working with specialists in church construction and childhood development had ensured that every aspect of the project reflected best practices and current standards for educational facilities and child care operations. The design process had involved extensive consultation with early childhood education experts, safety professionals, and accessibility advocates who helped create spaces that would serve children with diverse needs and backgrounds. The decision to name the facility after my grandmother reflected both personal sentiment and recognition of the woman whose values and determination had influenced my understanding of success and service to others. Abuela Elena had worked as a seamstress and housekeeper to support her family while maintaining dignity and grace that inspired everyone who knew her, demonstrating that meaningful contribution to community didn't depend on wealth or social status but on character and commitment. Pastor Davidson's tears when he examined the donation documents reflected his deep understanding of what this gift would mean for families throughout Cedar Falls who had been struggling with childcare challenges that limited their employment opportunities and educational advancement. The center would serve working parents regardless of their church affiliation or ability to pay full program costs, fulfilling the congregation's mission to serve the broader community rather than just its own membership. The immediate response from congregation members who surrounded our table after the announcement demonstrated the hunger that existed within the community for this type of facility and programming. Parents shared stories about childcare struggles that had forced them to turn down job opportunities or educational programs, while grandparents expressed relief that their adult children would finally have reliable options for supervision and enrichment activities. The transformation in Patricia's expression as she processed what had just happened revealed the depth of her miscalculation about my financial situation and personal character. The woman who had spent years questioning my stability and judgment was confronted with evidence of success that exceeded anything she had imagined possible, creating cognitive dissonance that would require fundamental reassessment of her assumptions and behavior. Uncle William's squeeze of Patricia's hand suggested that he had been aware of the dynamics between us, and perhaps had been trying to moderate his wife's criticism through subtle interventions that hadn't been successful in changing her approach. His expression showed a mixture of pride in my achievement and concern about the public nature of the confrontation that had just unfolded at what was supposed to be a peaceful community gathering. The excitement that filled the fellowship hall created energy unlike anything I had experienced in that space, transforming what had begun as a traditional church potluck into a celebration of possibility and hope that would resonate throughout the Cedar Falls community for months to come. People began discussing programming ideas and volunteer opportunities, imagining how the new facility would enhance their ability to support working families and provide enrichment activities for children. Mrs. Henderson's emotional reaction to the architectural drawings reflected her decades of dedication to children's programming, despite inadequate facilities and limited resources that had constrained her ability to implement the kind of comprehensive services she knew were needed. The prospect of bright modern classrooms and dedicated outdoor space represented the fulfillment of dreams she had carried for years, while making do with basement rooms and borrowed equipment. The conversations that continued throughout the afternoon revealed the broader impact that enhanced childcare options would have on economic development and family stability throughout Cedar Falls and the surrounding rural area. Single mothers would be able to pursue additional education or training that could improve their earning potential, while two-parent families would gain flexibility that could allow both adults to advance their careers without compromising their children's supervision and safety. The media attention that followed the announcement brought recognition not just to my donation, but to the innovative approach we had taken to community development through private-public partnership that honored local values while addressing modern challenges. Regional newspapers and business publications featured stories about successful entrepreneurs who maintained connections to their hometowns and used their resources to create lasting positive change. Speaking invitations that resulted from this publicity provided platforms for sharing lessons learned about authentic business success and responsible community engagement, topics that resonated with audiences throughout the Midwest who were grappling with similar challenges in their own communities. These presentations helped establish my reputation as someone who understood both business excellence and social responsibility, attracting clients who shared similar values. The long-term impact of that Sunday afternoon extended far beyond the immediate family reconciliation and community celebration to influence how I approached all subsequent business decisions and personal relationships. The experience had demonstrated that authentic success required courage to stand up for your values even when facing criticism from people whose opinions you valued, while also showing the importance of using individual achievements to create opportunities for others. The Children's Center would serve as a permanent reminder that private success and public service were complementary rather than competing priorities, encouraging other successful individuals to consider how their resources and expertise could address community needs that government programs and traditional charitable organizations weren't able to meet effectively. The model we had created offered replicable strategies for rural economic development that honored local traditions, while embracing innovation and change. Years later, when I reflect on the journey that led from public humiliation to meaningful community impact, I recognize that Patricia's criticism, however painful and inappropriate, had forced me to examine my own motivations and clarify my commitment to using success in service of something larger than personal enrichment. The confrontation had been necessary to break dysfunctional patterns and create space for healthier relationships based on mutual respect rather than defensive positioning. The harvest potluck that had begun with family tension and ended with community celebration became an annual reminder that individual courage and authentic values could transform not just personal circumstances, but entire communities, when guided by genuine commitment to serving others. The children's laughter that now echoed from the playground we had built would inspire future generations to believe that their own dreams and ambitions could contribute to the common good, while honoring the relationships and traditions that had shaped their development. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.